In our last lesson, we focused on dividing and finding remainders. We have a remainder when our divisor does not go into our dividend evenly. Today, we're going to focus on some word problems and understanding what do we do with those remainders. Sometimes all we're going to use in our problem is the quotient. Other times, we're going to use the remainder. There are two other ways that we're going to interpret the remainder that we're going to talk about tomorrow, but we broke this lesson up into two pieces. So we're going to be looking at word problems. Let's first start by looking at all of the pieces of our division problems and what those different pieces mean. So we have two division problems here, the same problem just written in two different ways. The first thing is our dividend, and that is our total number that we're starting off with. Our divisor is how many groups we're going to be splitting our dividend into. Our quotient is how many pieces are going to be in each of those groups, and our remainder is what's left over. We have the same thing on the bottom. Our divisor is going to be going inside of our house into our dividend. Our quotient is how many equal pieces are going to be inside of all of those parts, and then our remainder is what's left over. Let's take a look at a few problems just so that we can refresh ourselves on how we find a remainder. In this problem, we have 27 divided by 5. One way that we can solve this problem is by drawing a picture. Our 5 represents our equal pieces. So we can draw 5 circles. We're going to split our 27 into 5 equal groups. One way that we can do that is by starting to separate those 27 out. So I'd count by 5s and I'd put a dot in each of my circles. So here I have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and I'm going to stop right there because if I count another 5, I'm up to 30, and that's too much. So I have 25, I have 5 dots in each of my circles, and I have 2 that are left over before I get to 27. When I'm interpreting this information, the number of dots that I have in each of my groups is going to be my quotient. And there are 5 dots in each of those circles. And the number of dots that are left over are going to be my remainder. So I have 2 dots left over. If I was looking at all this information, my 27 is my dividend, my 5 is my divisor, my other 5 is the number of dots in my circles, that's my quotient, my answer to my division problem, and my 2 is my remainder. Let's take a look at one more problem. Here we have 61 divided by 8. Now my numbers are starting to get a little bit bigger. I could still draw myself 8 circles and separate my 61 dots or 61 pieces into those 8 circles. That might take me a little while, but I could do that. If I separated my 61 out into my 8 circles, I would have 7 dots in each circle, and I'd have 5 that are left over. Another way that I can think of this problem is thinking of my multiplication facts. So 8 times what is going to get me close to 67, but I can't go over. 8 times 7 gets me 56. That's pretty close to 61. And then I would have to count up. 56 plus what was going to give me 61. 56 plus 5 more gives me 51. So here I would have my 7, or the 7 dots, that's my quotient, and my remainder would be the number that I have to count up to get my dividend. In this case, there are 5 more than I would need, so that would be my remainder. Multiplication is another way for me to think about division. So for this problem, my dividend would be 61. That's my piece that's being separated. My divisor would be 8, the number of pieces I'm separating it into. My quotient is how many pieces each of those 8 groups is going to get, and my remainder is what's left over. Now, when all we have to do is divide, we'd be finding a quotient and remainder, and we'd be stopping there. But not always are we just going to have to divide. Sometimes we're going to have word problems, and we're going to have to figure out what are we going to do with this information that we have? What are we going to do with our quotient? What are we going to do with our remainder? So there are 4 different ways that we can interpret our remainder or identify what we're doing with that remainder. We can use the quotient, just use that one piece of our answer. We can use the remainder. We can add 1 to the quotient, or we could make a fraction. Today, all we're going to focus on is using the quotient and using the remainder. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at a few word problems, and we're going to identify In this word problem, are they asking me for the quotient? Are they asking me for the total number of equal pieces that I've separated it into? Or are they asking me for what's left over? I'm going to identify, use the quotient, use the remainder, and then figure out what my answer is. So here's my first problem. Julie baked 45 brownies for the bake sale. She placed 8 brownies in each bag. How many full bags of brownies will she have for the bake sale? Let's think about what this question's asking us. She's baking a total number of 45 brownies. Yummy. Then she's placing these brownies and she's putting 8 of them in a bag. So picture that in your head. We have all these brownies, 48 of them that she's baked and she's cut into pieces, and she's putting 8 brownies in each bag. Now my question's asking me how many full bags of brownies will she have for the bake sale? Because I'm taking a number, I'm taking my 48 and I'm separating it out so that there are 8 brownies in each bag, this is going to be a division problem. So my first step is going to be to divide. So my division problem is 45 divided by 8. I want to understand what all of these different pieces are. Yes, they have names like my dividend and my divisor, but I want to know in this problem, what am I talking about? My 45 is my total number of brownies. So that's what my 45 represents. And then my 8 represents that there are going to be 8 brownies in each bag. So my 8 is the number that go in each bag. And because there are 8 that are going into each bag, that's going to be a full bag. So if I have 8 brownies, that means the bag is full. When I divide this, I'm going to get a quotient and I'm going to get a remainder. My quotient is going to represent the total number of bags that have 8 brownies in them. And my remainder is going to represent what's left over. It's important for me to know what these different pieces mean. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide. And to do that, I could draw a picture, or I can think about multiplication. 8 times what gets me close to 45 without going over? 8 times 5. 8 times 5 would get me to 40. And then I need to think 40 plus what is going to get me up to 45, which would be 5, and that's going to be my remainder. So in this problem, I have 5, remainder 5. Now I need to figure out which of these 5s am I going to use. In this case, they're both 5s, but it's important for me to know which am I going to use. I want my full bags, and we talked about how my quotient, this represents the total number of full bags that I have. My 5, my other 5 in my remainder, this is going to represent what's left over. My question's asking me for full bags, so I'm going to be using my quotient. So this problem is a use the quotient. Because that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my quotient, and in this case, what I'm going to use is 5. So my answer would be 5 full bags of brownies. So my answer to this problem is 5 full bags of brownies. All right, our next problem is also about a bake sale. So Jamie baked 60 cookies for the bake sale. She placed 8 cookies in each bag. How many leftover cookies will she have? The first thing I need to do is figure out, well, what is my question asking me? She's baking 60 cookies, that's a lot of cookies, and she's separating those cookies out to put 8 cookies in each bag. So because she's taking a whole of 60 and separating those cookies out into separate bags, we're going to be doing some division. We're going to be dividing 60 divided by 8. So my first step is going to be to divide, but I need to understand what each of these numbers represents. My 60 is going to be my total number of cookies, and my 8 is going to represent the number that make a full bag. So let's go ahead and divide, and when I divide, my quotient is going to represent the number of full bags that I have, and my remainder is going to represent what I have left over. So I can draw a picture to help me with this, or I can think about multiplication. I'm going to think about multiplication. So 8 times what gets me close to 60 without going over? 8 times 7, that's going to give me 56. So 7 is going to be my quotient. Then I need to figure out what my remainder is by saying 56 plus what is going to get me to 60. 56 plus 4 more is going to get me to 60. So my quotient is 7 and my remainder is 4. My 7 represents my total number of full bags, my full bags of cookies, and my 4 represents the number of cookies I have left over. Now I need to go back into my question and figure out what it's asking me. My question says, how many leftover cookies will she have? Well, because my remainder represents my leftover cookies, this is a use the remainder problem. I would use my remainder to get my answer. So my answer would be 4 leftover cookies, and I found that out by using my remainder in my division problem. All right, let's take a look at another one. I want you to solve this problem. 67 people waited in line for a roller coaster ride. Each roller coaster ride can take 9 people. If each ride is full except for the last one, how many people are on the last ride? How are we going to solve this problem? What is my problem talking about? I want you to set up your problem and then tell me, what do each of these numbers represent? So this is a division problem. I'm going to have 27 divided by 9, and I want to know, what does each of these numbers represent? My 67 represents the total number of people in line. My 9 represents the total number of people that can ride on one ride, or my full rides in the roller coaster. So my 9 is the total number of people for there to be a full ride of the roller coaster. Now that I know what each of these pieces represent, I can solve this problem, and I need to understand, what am I solving for? When I solve this problem, what is my quotient going to represent, and what is my remainder going to represent? My quotient is going to represent the total number of rides that are full. My remainder is going to represent the people that are left over, that aren't on a full ride. So let me go ahead and solve for my quotient and for my remainder. I'm going to use multiplication to help me. 9 times what gets me close to 67 without going over? Well, 9 times 7 gives me 63, so that's pretty close. So my quotient is going to be 7. And then I need to think 63 plus what is going to get me up to 67 plus 4 more, which is going to be my remainder. Now, I need to go back to my problem and identify, am I using my quotient or am I using my remainder? It says if each ride is full except for the last one, well, 7 represents my total number of full rides, and I want to know what my last ride is, the one that's not full. How many people are on the last ride, or how many people are left over on the not full ride? So this is going to be a use the remainder problem. And my answer to this problem is 4 people, because that's the leftover people that are not on a full ride. Let's take a look at our next problem. This next problem states, Tanner's soccer team of 23 players traveled to a tournament. Each van can hold 5 kids. How many vans will be full? Let's go ahead. What is the problem I'm solving? And then what does each of these numbers represent? This is going to be a division problem. There are a total of 23 players that are traveling to the tournament. So my 23 is going to represent my total number of players. And my 5 is going to represent the number that can be in each van for each van to be full. So my 5 represents the kids in each van for a van to be full. All right. I want you to solve this problem. What is my quotient going to mean, and what is my remainder going to mean? What are those numbers going to represent? And then which of those numbers am I using? Am I going to use the quotient or am I going to use the remainder? If I were to solve this problem, I would use multiplication to help me. So 5 times what gets me close to 23 without going over? 5 times 4. So 4 is going to be my quotient. And then I'm going to say, okay, well, if that's 20, 20 plus what gets me to 23? And 3 more. So I have a remainder of 3. Now I need to understand, what does my 4 represent and what does my 3 represent? Well, my 4 represents the total number of full vans that I have. If I were to draw vans, I would have 4 of them that were full. And then my 3 is the number of players that are not in a full van, or the number of players that are left. I need to go up to my problem and figure out, what is it asking me for? It's asking me about how many vans will be full. So here I already showed that my quotient is going to represent my full vans. So this is going to be a use the quotient problem. And I know it's a use the quotient problem because I identified what each of the numbers in my problem represent. Okay, that's all there is to this lesson on interpreting the remainder. We need to understand what each piece of our division problem represents. And then we need to read our problem carefully and figure out, well, what is it asking us for? In this case, are we going to be using the quotient or are we going to be using the remainder of our problem? All right, that's it for today. Tomorrow we're going to focus on the other two ways that we can interpret the remainder. See you tomorrow.